Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Ratner. I'm a member of the JDCA board, and I just would first like to really welcome everybody to our Jewish Democratic Council of America's debate debrief. We have a lot to cover today and a really wonderful panelist. Before we begin, I do think it's appropriate that we all just take a moment, obviously today, to reflect on the events that took place 23 years ago on September 11th, 2001. So if everyone would just take a second. Thank you. If the events of that day and the days following have taught us anything, it's the competent leadership matters, who we elect as our president matters, and how we chart our future together matters. And on that note, I hope that everybody enjoyed last night as much as I did. We witnessed a clear contrast, to put it mildly, between the two presidential candidates. Vice President Kamala Harris exhibited moral clarity. She showed leadership. By contrast, Donald Trump continued to display blatant lies, petty insults, and hateful rhetoric. And as a proud Ohioan, a sort of odd obsession with the notion that me and my brethren are wandering around eating cats and dogs. It really sort of seemed like from the moment that Vice President Harris went after Trump's rally size, from that point forward, he just seemed like he was sort of unable to shake it off. It felt like he really started to have some bad blood with Harris, and she sent the message that as long as we all do our part, Donald Trump and the White House are never, ever getting back together. Doing our part is the critical portion there, because this election has always been tight, and it will be tight. What we'll talk about a little bit today is, did this debate actually move the needle? Did it change the mind of voters? This past Monday, we were very proud to release the first ever poll of Jewish voters with a head-to-head matchup between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. It showed what we hoped and suspected, which is that Jewish voters overwhelmingly support Kamala Harris, 72 to 25%. Frankly, after last night's debate, I wouldn't be surprised if that margin grows. That said, we learned the hard way in 2016. Polls are a snapshot in time, and polls don't vote. I'll steal a line from Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler, who says that this election is going to be within the margin of effort. That's why all of you being here today is so critical. That's why all of you joining JDCA events and JDCA phone banking is so critical. Going to swing states if you're able. We have to do our work in getting out the Jewish vote, because together we can and we will elect Kamala Harris as our next president. Now, we're Jews, we like to talk, so we like to get together after big events, and we've called on our friend, Democratic strategist, political expert Simon Rosenberg, to help us sort of unpack these big takeaways from the debate last night. JDCA CEO Halie Soifer will start the discussion by asking some questions that we received in advance. Then you're welcome. Please keep the questions coming, send them in chat. We will try our very best to get to all of them. If you don't know Simon, he spent 3 decades in national media and politics. He's a veteran of 2 presidential campaigns, including a senior role in the famous 1992 Clinton War Room. In 96, he founded the New Democrat Network, the New Policy Institute, where he advised leading politicians and policymakers. Throughout the 2022 midterms, he bolstered his reputation as a Democratic strategist by continuously remaining one of the sole optimistic voices about Democrat chances in 22. After 22, he began a new venture, the Hopium Chronicles, where he's countering the MAGA narrative through hope and optimism. We're so fortunate to have had him join us for numerous JDCA events, to lend his expertise in that hopium that we so badly need. And we are really looking forward to receiving more of it today. With that point, I'll just thank you all again for being here. Thank you all for the work you've done and the work you're going to do, and kick things over to Halie to start today's conversation.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And as a Swiftie, I especially appreciated the witty Taylor Swift references, as well as your remark earlier that Taylor Swift has more followers than the number of Americans who voted in the last election. So let's keep that in mind in terms of the significance of that endorsement. We look forward to hearing from our friend Simon about the debate, but I'm just going to start with one observation. And that is that last night, we all saw, the world saw the sharpest contrast between 2 presidential candidates in our history. Vice President Harris demonstrated moral clarity, leadership, strength, and a clear command of the issues, as well as a forward-looking vision for the future. And Donald Trump espoused grievances, insults, blusters, lies. He was untethered to the truth. He was devoid of substance. He was detached from reality. And he presented, to the extent he presented anything, it was a backward looking vision for our country. It's clear we can't afford 4 more years of Donald Trump. So, Simon, I'm definitely interested. I know we're all interested in your key takeaways
Yeah.
from last night's debate. What were your observations?
Well, first of all, Matt, thank you for the warm introduction. And Halie, it's always great to be back with you and Bobby and the whole team. Sometimes things are complicated in our business and sometimes they're simple. And, your description and Matt's description really is sort of what happened, right? I mean, she kicked his ass and won the debate, and he was unfit, unwell, untethered, all the things that you said. And I think what was really, I have a couple thoughts to begin with, and then let's get into the questions. One is, I think you really had to watch this debate. I mean, one of the reasons Biden wanted the debate so badly is they felt that people needed to see Trump as he is now to really believe it. That he gets normalized, and the Trump 2024, which is diminished and more extreme and more unfit and all untethered, that words in newspapers never could do it justice. We struggled, I think, as a family to really try to articulate what he had become, the threat that he was, the ugliness of it all. And I think there was this belief in Biden world that we needed to bring him to people and let people see this version of Trump, which is why they wanted the debates and to move them up. And I think that Trump's horrific debate performance in June was obscured by Joe Biden's struggles that night. But it was important that people got to see him last night in all of his ugliness, because it is astonishing, actually. And it's astonishing over time. And in terms of his detachment, this imaginary world that he lives in, that he's increasingly spending more time in than the real world. And that, and so I think that number one is, it was real. And I can just speak to my own children who watched last night, who are not deeply political. They were surprised at how crazy he was, and those of us who pay attention to politics were not surprised, because there's only one Donald Trump. There's not a normal Donald Trump and then this other Donald Trump, right? There's just him and everything we saw. I would say for her, the word I keep thinking about so much this morning is prepared. I mean, she was prepared in every way. She was prepared to make her case. She was prepared to manage him. One of the things that I wrote about at Hopium over the last couple of days is I did thousands of appearances on Fox News over 17 years. I was often on 2 to 3 days a week. I was unpaid. I never took money from Rupert Murdoch, but I had to go on live television and deal with this stuff. And it would be hard sometimes, because and particularly after Trump got elected, is that the person I'd be on with would start talking about things that I didn't know about, because they were part of this kind of right-wing mythology. And I'd be on national television being asked to respond to something that I didn't think actually ever happened and I didn't know about. And that stuff is very hard. And I was worried. The one worry I had about last night, because I knew that she was going to be herself, because she's been herself throughout this campaign. I mean, one of the reasons she's been so powerful is that she's not trying to be anybody other than herself. And what herself is very strong and powerful and confident and amazing over the last few months. But she managed him so well. And needed to be a strategy, because you can't manage him in real time. I mean, think about how he kind of bullied the anchors again, right? Like, he got his extra moments in all the time. They couldn't contain him. And she was ready for that. And they had a strategy for that. So not only did they provoke him, right, through the crowd size thing, which was kind of just shocking how he took the bait so quickly and kind of, I think, escalated up and got to a place where he was kind of unraveled, but also her facial expressions and the way that she reacted to him in the split screen was so effective, right, in sort of helping us understand the nuttiness and the craziness and the madness that we were witnessing in a way that was relatable. And she won the split screen war. And I think one of the two things I'll say finally is that one of the things that is I'm just kind of overwhelmed by with her is she's incredibly media savvy. Her understanding of the TV kind of visual imagery of politics is very advanced and very innate. And in some of this comes out of being in California politics, where you don't do retail. It's all about television. It's all about breaking through. It's all about using visual media to move your stories and narratives. And she's just got it. Like, she's got crazy instincts on this stuff. And even when she came out of the box with Beyonce's song, which was so powerful and strong, her sophistication of the media aspect of the game is super important, because that's his superpower, right? And in order to defeat him, she needed to compete in that realm, and she crushed him in that realm last night. Not the arguments and the debate part, right, of the words and the stories, but just the imagery and his slovenliness and his ugliness and her elegance and her keeping cool while he was an emotional train wreck all night long. All of that stuff was just unbelievable, like A plus plus plus. And then in terms of just the actual arguments and the words, she showed incredible preparation and incredible preparedness for the moment on a wide range of issues, where she gave very detailed and thoughtful answers that were also her answers and her story, not parroting others or not being Joe Biden's wingman, right? She was Kamala Harris last night, laying out what she was going to do as president. And so she continues to perform at this extraordinary level. I mean, this campaign is like the highest degree of difficulty that we've ever seen in modern politics. She had to build her story and narrative. She had to take over a party that was torn. She had to manage her relationships with Joe Biden. She's had to deal with difficult, challenging international issues, build a campaign that was built for somebody else, take over a campaign, pick a VP, run the convention, now do this, all in this. This is like 18 months of work in 2 months. And I think I was on a podcast earlier with somebody who said that as a young woman, where she's feeling is that, this joy and that women are always underestimated. And that Kamala Harris has probably done the most sophisticated and complicated set of political things that any modern Democratic politician has done. And she's done it flawlessly, without any mistakes, and doing things that are extraordinary. And so I'm very optimistic. I mean, even coming in, and my last point, Halie, is that even before the debate, the polling over the last few days, despite the New York Times poll and Nate Cohn's need and the New York Times need to continue to crap all over Democrats, right, which seems to be their entire reason for being these days, is that the polling was actually very good. And what we're seeing is a remarkable harmony in the data. We're ahead by 2 to 3 points in the national polling. We're ahead by 2 to 3 points in the congressional generic, which is about the same. And that's are you going to vote Democrat, Republican for Congress? We're doing better than he is in the battleground states. We're going to have a much stronger capacity to close because of our financial, volunteer, and enthusiasm advantage. And now we have all the things she gave us from the debate, which is greater confidence in our candidate. The campaign knows that they can take this guy on. He's diminished and spiraling. And she also gave us new words and new moments about him and about her that we needed in order to win this election. And these moments that, comes out of these debates, which last for days, some of them last for years. I mean, I think her Putin eating his lunch line is going to be with us for decades, right? I mean, it was the keeper, in my view, or one of the many keepers. But if you think back to how many moments she had, these moments that will be all over social media, that we'll be sharing, there were so many of them. There weren't 2 or 3. Like this morning when I produced Hopium, like I had to get it down to 4, and it was a struggle, right, for me to get it down because there were so many potent moments. And so the other thing she did, and the reason why I think we should all be deeply optimistic about this moment, is that she made her campaign much stronger last night. And even just that one line that I keep thinking about, that you were fired by 81 million Americans. Oh my God, that was like drop the mic moment, right, in the debate. And so we now have that line just as people who go on television and make our case to be able to use. So in their prep for the debate, they uncovered powerful new ways to tell her story and to indict him that are going to be material, I think, in the discourse for the next couple of months. And so, yeah, look, I'm an optimistic guy. That's my thing, right? But listen, she just rocked it last night, and he was just a mess. And, it's much more likely that we're going to win the election now.
Well, amen to that. Okay. Well, we're getting a lot of questions. I'm
Yes.
calling questions, but just picking up on this theme that you've mentioned about the key moments. It seemed like right off the bat, she kind of baited him and he took the bait. There were 3 moments in particular, I think, that he seemed kind of rattled by her. The first was right at the beginning, the handshake, right? She introduced herself, she repeated her name, which he never said the whole time. Obviously clarified.
He kind of grunted, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Right, but he never uttered it. Okay.
Yeah.
The second was when, of course, she challenged us all to attend his rallies, to hear his craziness about Hannibal Lecter and to see his supporters leaving. Just clearly got under his skin. The third also when she mentioned world leaders are laughing at him. That military leaders say he's a disgrace. And his response to that was, well, Viktor Orban likes me, an autocrat who's aligned with anti-Semites, might we add. What do you think is the impact of these moments, the significance of this moment? Because she clearly got under his skin, and how might this impact the way he now campaigns against her, which he clearly didn't know how to do for the next 8 weeks?
It's an important question, and I think that I mean the question of whether or not we're entering what I call a virtuous cycle, and they're entering a vicious cycle now, where Republicans really. I was on a national radio interview this morning and on Canadian radio, the Canadian Broadcasting Company, and my Republican opponent, we were on for like 20 minutes, and my Republican opponent started by just trashing Trump, right, and saying what a bad job he did. And then he got asked at the end of the interview, would he vote for Trump? And he said, I'm not sure. And that was not really what I expected. And I think that Trump created, in this kind of confidence game that we have to have in politics, where do you believe in your leader? Are you willing to write the checks? Are you willing to do the work? Are you willing to go talk to your friends in those moments where you're at dinner with 4 of your friends and you're talking about the election and you say, I'm really excited or I'm really worried, right? These moments we all have. We are coming out of this with all this like, man, she's awesome. I love her and I'm 100% on board. And they're like, our guy is actually kind of crazy, and so I think it really is undermining the integrity of their enterprise in a way, because it wasn't 1 moment or 2 moments. It was many, many, many moments. I mean, he actually amazingly raised this thing about the dog eating and the immigrant, the Haitian immigrants in Ohio, which was this completely fake thing that people on the right, just so everybody understands about that was a made up, invented attack on Democrats that became adopted by the right almost like for shits and giggles, as we call it, right? Like they started promoting it almost because of the absurdity of it. And so it became like an in-house joke on the right wing to be talking about it. And then the president, because he's an idiot, or the former president, because he's an idiot and he's delusional, repeated it. And I will tell you that, knowing what I know about right-wing media and how this all works, I just couldn't believe he actually went there. I just couldn't believe it, because it was something that was so obviously a fake and ridiculous right-wing meme that he actually believed that it to be true, and he got challenged. And I think it was very important. I mean, one of the things I talked about before the debate was it was going to be critical for the anchors to at one point pierce the veil of the veil of his nuttiness and his madness. And they did. And that was really important, because then it wasn't about her doing it. It was about an objective person who was obviously, saying, dude, you're like just making stuff up here. You got to cut it out. And I thought that was really an important moment, of the many, many important moments last night. But I do think, look, this gets back to this idea of preparation. They were very prepared. They had a strategy. She had a plan. She executed it, and it succeeded. And because those kinds of moments, there were many moments that happened that were clearly rehearsed, that were things that were intentional, that they wanted to do. The rattling of him was something that they wanted. And look, he's an impulsive mess, and he kept taking the bait all night long, and it was shocking. And so I think on the Republican side, there's going to be a lot of worry that this guy just doesn't have what it takes to win this thing. And they're right to be worried. He never had it. I mean, he was always diminished and wild and extreme. And I think even the abortion, I think one of the things that was so interesting, I'll stop here in a second, but the abortion exchange was incredible, and it was early, when people were still watching, right? A lot more people watched the first half hour, the first hour, right? The viewership goes down over time. That exchange, her emotional connection, her passion in it, the way she talked about it, and his just complete incoherence about something that really, really matters to people, was also kind of a shocking, and it was extended, and it went on for a long time, and it kept getting worse for him during that exchange. And I think that was, to me, at that moment, I was like, he can't recover from that. That was the moment where the debate was just gone for him, and there was no way he was going to be able to recover. And where she just smoked him,
Agree. Okay, I'm going to get into some of the questions that we are getting from the audience. I'm going to combine some. So Mark has said, with Trump supporters being so committed, I don't see where anything he said last night will move the needle. Did it change anything? And we're going to combine it with Nadine's question. I don't think she should do another debate. Do you?
Yeah. So the CNN poll done that was released last night, and these flash polls are of questionable integrity, but it was there, said she won the debate 63-37, and that was in a universe that was +6 Republicans, so a much more Republican universe. Republicans, there were significant chunks of people, Republican voters, who were deeply unhappy with his performance last night, right? And those people were also on television, and I was on a national radio broadcast with a guy this morning who was the Republican spokesperson for the Trump campaign, saying he wasn't voting for Trump anymore, right? So I think this idea that his support is unshakable, we're going to find out. We've already seen more defections from Trump from prominent Republicans than any presidential candidate in modern American history. And I just want to say one thing that, Halie, we talked about in Chicago, is we have to stop believing that Trump has superpowers, right? He only won the election in 2016 because of Russia and Comey intervening in these extraordinary interventions, and he still barely won. MAGA has lost in 2018 and 2020 and 2022, and he underperformed public polls in this year. And this idea that he's got this hidden 3 to 4 points and that we have to win by 4 or 5 points. I just want to say this, frankly, is that's just total bullshit. That's an invented right-wing talking point. He may have overperformed polls in 2020. Republicans have been underperforming all their public polls since Dobbs happened in the spring of 2022. Trump underperformed all his public polls in the primaries. The fascists underperformed public polls in France and in Europe. The right wing got their butts kicked in the UK. And so this idea that we come back to so much with him, which is this sort of post-trauma from 2016, is that Trump has these sort of secret magical powers and this hold over folks. No, he doesn't. He's just a guy. And he unraveled last night. And that was part of what Kamala wanted to do, was to treat him. I go back to this basic take about Kamala, about part of the reason she's being so effective. I think her takedowns on Trump are the best that any Democrat has come up with in 9 years. And I think it's in part because she told us why. In this very first statement she made when she in that event she did at the headquarters when she kind of did her first public event. She started off by saying, you know me as a vice president and senator, but before then I was a prosecutor and I was a city attorney and I was an attorney general, and I prosecuted people like Donald Trump. I know him. I know people like him, and I put them in jail. And I think we have to go back to, like, where is this strength and power that we're seeing with her coming from? And I think it goes back, she told us in the first 2 minutes she announced this candidate, which is that she sees this guy as, a really bad guy that she's got to go put away. And she's been really good at that. And she knows people like him, and she's not intimidated by him. She doesn't believe he has magical powers. He's a serial criminal. He's a rapist, fraudster, traitor, a felon. He's unwell, untethered, unfit, all these things that we all know. And she knows that. And she expressed that in a way that was so persuasive last night. And so my advice to all of you as we go forward is, all of these moments where we think he has superpowers or there's some magic plan or that he's somehow going to, concoct something that will somehow fundamentally change the election, I want to counter that by saying that I think the guy's kind of a big idiot. And if he was so powerful, why did they keep losing elections all over the country? And why did the European fascists perform so poorly? And so we've got to be a little bit careful not to do what Timothy Snyder talks about, which is to give the authoritarians power that they don't actually have. And so that's just one bit of advice, I think, for us as we go forward, because that's what she did last night, right? She pulled the curtain back from the wizard. She made it clear the emperor is not wearing any clothes. And we've got to do the same thing every day, because he is an historic embarrassment for this country and for the Republican Party.
Okay, so reposing the questions as yes or no's.
Yeah.
You think last night changed anything?
Yes, I think it changed a lot.
Do you think she should do another debate?
They have asked for one. He has said he doesn't want to do it. I imagine that he's not going to do it. And I'm sure his campaign's kind of freaking out today. Because every time he has spoken in public, he performed terribly at the last debate. He performed terribly at the convention. And I think that they're in a very, as somebody who's worked on presidential campaigns, there is not a clear path forward for them right now, right? Because they don't have an ability to change the current trajectory. We have much more money. We have a much more powerful campaign. Early voting starts very soon. Taylor Swift not only endorsed Kamala, but she's promoting voter registration and early vote, which is incredibly sophisticated and smart of her. So, they're in a lot of trouble. And remember, they're already performing unbelievably poorly in the Senate races. And those candidates may further drag down the ticket. And the congressional generic has moved against them pretty significantly in the last few weeks. So they're in a very tough strategic place. I mean, what do? You basically can't sell the guy. Every time he goes out and does an event, he says crazy stuff that's now going to get much more covered. Now that she weakened him and he looks weak to the National Press Corps, there's blood in the water, right? They're going to be much more aggressive about calling out all of his nuttiness. And listen, I'll give you an example of this. I mean, I got a call. I tweet a lot about his untetheredness, and I write about this a lot. And I feel like it's been wildly undercovered because I think he's mad, like he's a madman, right? I actually really believe that. I don't think this is an act. I think he's no longer aware of what's true and not true and what's real and not real. And this should be part of our discourse in the country. I got a call from a major reporter of the Washington Post who read one of my tweets about this and said, we're going to do a piece on this. And it's like, imagine that after all of this, that the major newspapers still have not really done a deep dive on whether or not one of our two presidential candidates has gone crazy. And which he has, by the way. I mean, it's just, there's not a Trump, this is not an act. Because if it was an act, it was like the worst act we've ever seen last night. And so I think those questions about whether or not like even David Muir last night pushing him on the eating of the dogs and stuff was this like really important moment to be like, dude, what in the world are you talking about? So I think that our strategic path is clear. Kamala Harris had a plan last night. She executed it. She won. The campaign has a plan. They're executing on it. And I think if we all work really, really hard, we should win. I don't know what they do. And obviously, Russia, blah, 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 China, all these things could happen. A meteor could hit the earth. I mean, there's a million things that could happen. But the likely scenario now is that, or in terms of strategy, there's just not an obvious way they salvage this thing. And yeah, they're going to have to dirty her up and muddy her up, which means that what can you do? You have to keep building her up. In your communications with your friends, it's probably more important to talk about her than to talk about him. Also, I'm just sort of over him and I don't want to talk about him anymore. And we all need to move on from him. And we should spend more of our time building her up and talking about how much we admire her and respect her and how ready she is. In our communications and our networks, that's probably the more important thing to do now than to continue to indict him. I'm not saying you don't do it, but I think the priority is to continue to build her up and make people feel more secure and certain about her, which I think she did a lot to do last night.
Agree. But one more question about him.
Yep.
Last night, and this is Marissa's question.
Yeah.
Last, he vehemently denied knowing anything about the 922-page document that is Project 2025 that many of his supervisors worked on for the past 3 years and includes a lot of the policy proposals that he has said he will enact. The reason he's vehemently denying it is because he knows that this is so extreme that he's going to lose people if people really understood the contents of this. How do we message on the extreme danger that is Project 2025 in a way that those independent voters, and there are some left, yes, undecided voters out there, can really understand?
I mean, I think there's two different issues, right? There's one is what does the campaign do, and then what do we do, right? And I just generally give my advice about the role of you as an information warrior is that it's less important that you mimic talking points than it is to find one thing about Project 2025 or one thing about Trump that really is meaningful to you, and to master that and to have passion about that, because I think that to be persuasive, passion is critical. People have to really believe this is important to you. And so I think in terms of dumbing it down or making it easy, just pick one thing. I think for a lot of people, it's going to be the fact that, this party has already stripped the rights and freedoms away of the women of America, and they're going to keep going. This is just the beginning. I think for a lot of people, that's enough, and will be sufficient. So whatever it is, just pick one thing. I do think the campaign, what happens in a campaign like this is they have a target audience and they bring all this stuff in focus groups and in polling to the target audience, and they test what are the things that move those voters the most. And then that's what they talk about, right? I mean, this isn't, and so that may not be the same thing that moves you. But trust me, they have done an enormous amount of market research about the indictment of him. And what's been interesting, if we can interpret what they're doing, is this issue of the defections of Republicans and people who work for him is clearly something that's very powerful to independent voters and to Republican leaning voters, because it is so central to the communications that they've been undertaking in the last few weeks. And her last night, one of her many 15 different moments, was her reciting all these people that had warned and said a disgrace, as you mentioned, and warned about him, was unbelievably powerful. I mean, she just nailed that section as well as she nailed any section last night. And, they just went up with this ad, that's now running about all the people warning about the danger. And it's clear from their research based on the advertising that the thing about Project 2025 that is connecting with voters the most is that he would be sort of an unchecked dictator and that he could do whatever he wanted. And because that's coming up a lot also in their communications, that because of the Supreme Court, and she said it last night, right? But this idea that he could just do whatever he wanted and was unchecked and he was kind of a madman is clearly also coming up. And I'll give you guys another example of this. I mean, I just am involved in a poll in North Carolina of Hispanic voters in North Carolina. And we asked most important issue, and it was open-ended, so we didn't give them a list. And Project 2025 was like the fifth most important thing to low information Hispanic voters in North Carolina. So that stuff has broken through. I mean, there is an idea that he wants to do crazy things. And it's in part because there's what's already baked into the electorate is that something's gone wrong with the Republican Party. This has been the thing driving the vote since 2018. And so we don't need to do a lot to evoke this from out of the electorate, right? It's already in the electorate. It's a question of what's the most effective way of evoking it and pulling it out. And what happened in 2022 is that Dobbs pulled it out for everybody, and became the thing that was the touchstone about like, these guys have gone too far. It's too much. They're too extreme. Trump just did it all by himself last night for 90, over 90 minutes. But the campaign has spent a lot of money in testing all this stuff. And the interesting thing about what happens in a messaging campaign like this is that, it's like a chess game, right? You have to move this piece and this piece and this piece. We're only still in the part of the chess game where the pawns are being moved, right? The piece that takes out the queen, the most devastating attacks won't be coming for a few more weeks, right? You build up to it. And what they're building up to now, what you can see just reinterpreting their ads, is they're spending a lot of time on this idea that there are people who are Republicans and people close to him that are warning that he's dangerous. And that's clearly something that's popping with voters because they're devoting an enormous amount of energy to that right now.
So we are getting a lot of questions about Israel in the chat. So we are going, one of them is, what do I say?
You should answer them.
What do I say to those who question her support of Israel? So we are going to post our talking points in the chat, but for a moment, I want to talk briefly about how Israel came into play in this debate. So she was asked about the conflict between Israel and Hamas, and she started her answer with an unequivocal condemnation of the terror that we saw on October 7th of Hamas. She affirmed Israel has the right to defend itself. She called for a ceasefire that includes the release of hostages. She conveyed her support of a two-state solution that includes security for Israel and self-determination for Palestinians. And then she provided an explicit assurance that she would always, this is a quote, give Israel the ability to defend itself, in particular as it relates to Iran and any threat that Iran and its proxies pose to Israel. Donald Trump, on the other hand, didn't say anything condemning Hamas or October 7th. He said nothing about the hostages yet again, which is similar to what we saw earlier this month when there was the horrific execution of 6 hostages, including 1 American. There was no empathy, no condolences, no condemnation from Donald Trump. He posted a political tweet about himself. He falsely accused Kamala Harris of not meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Earlier this summer in July, she met with him for an hour in the White House. And then he repeated this ominous threat that he's been saying lately. He said, Israel won't exist in 2 years if he's not elected president. He said, this is a quote, the whole place is going to get blown up if he's not elected president. For good measure, he added that he would settle the situation in the Middle East. He said he'd also end the war in Ukraine. All that is going to happen, not just if he's elected president, but during the transition period, because he said he's going to do it if he's the president-elect before he's president. Good luck to you, Donald Trump. And then he had the audacity of falsely accusing her of hating Israel, not once, but twice. Now, I've discussed this before, but it bears repeating, and I'll say it again. I've worked with Kamala Harris. I was her national security advisor in the Senate 7 years ago, 2017 and 2018. I traveled with her to Israel. I saw firsthand that her support of Israel and its security and its right to self-defense not only has been something that she has carried with her throughout her career, but it predates her time in this White House. It predates the fact that in this White House, she absolutely has shared Joe Biden's unequivocal and staunch support of Israel. It's something that she came to the Senate believing, and it is her view, it is her policy. It has not changed. It has never changed. It has only been strengthened in the aftermath of October 7th as she has supported the efforts of this administration to give Israel unprecedented military support, both in terms of the $14.3 billion that was provided earlier this year. It would have been sooner had Republicans not delayed it for 6 months, and J.D. Vance voted against it twice. But also by moving military assets to the region, by deploying the U.S. military 3 times in defense of Israel in a way that has been unprecedented in American history. After October 7th, in the lead up to and during the unprecedented Iranian attack on Israel on April 14th, it was April 13th and 14th. And then recently, given the Iranian threats against Israel, again, we've redeployed carrier strike groups to the Eastern Mediterranean. So we have talking points that reaffirm Vice President Harris's support of Israel. And as Simon has said, I think the most important thing that we can all do is not be on the defense. This is something about which we can be on the offense. Are we going to believe Donald Trump, who has repeatedly disparaged millions of us, including as recently as last night when he went to do his own spin, pathetically, in the spin room? He repeated, just for good measure, of course, that anyone who votes for her has to have their head examined. Are we going to believe him about her record or believe her record? She's never wavered on this issue. She has never wavered. She's a staunch supporter of Israel. So if anyone has any doubts, please let them know where she stands and where she's always stood on this issue and where she will continue to stand on this issue. We also know that Jewish voters don't buy it. You know, as our pollster says, there's me-search and there's research. And I know there are some who say, oh, we won't vote this way or that way because of Israel. Well, what we have seen as recently as this week, per a September national poll of Jewish voters that was conducted, is that 72% of Jewish voters are supporting Kamala Harris in a direct matchup with Donald Trump, who is at exactly 25%. Now, what's important about that 25%? It's a 0.0 gain from where he was in 2016. That is what he got election night 2016. Now, could there be better news? Yes, there could be better news. I'd like to see his 0% gain be in the negative and her numbers to go up even further. And that's the work that we all are going to be doing, that JDCA is doing in the next 8 weeks, is ensuring that Jewish voters show up and vote, not just for Kamala Harris, but for Democrats who share our values like Kamala Harris up and down the ticket. So, Simon, I think this is a good point to bring you in for closing thoughts on what we can all be doing. We have, it's actually 7 weeks and 6 days. It's not 8 weeks, but we know a lot of people are going to be voting in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
In less than 54 days. What should we be doing? Because polls don't vote. We learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
Even post-debate dials don't vote. What can we do to ensure that she wins?
By the way, wasn't that great what Halie just did? I always love coming on because I feel like I get all my talking points and help me manage all these complex issues. And I'll just say a few things. And it's great to be here with all of you. We need to go on offense. I mean, if you're not on offense in politics, you're losing. And whether that's about Kamala Harris or whether it's about Israel and all the things that Halie just went through, we just have to go win this election, and we need to do it by working harder than them and leaving it all on the playing field, as Coach Walls told us at the convention. Our vice president had a good line last night. She said, "Hard work is good work. We're going to win this election." And it's the first time she said we're going to win. I mean, she's been sort of talking about being the underdog, and she's been dancing around this. I think she was feeling it last night, right after the debate. And so I think in terms of funding this organization and other organizations that you fund that are going to help us win, it's do more. Whether however much time you are going to commit in volunteering in whatever way you volunteer, whether it's, emailing your friends and posting on social media or making phone calls or canvassing, you got to do more. We have an advantage now and we have to prosecute it aggressively. If we work and out hustle them, we should win this election. The Senate is going to be 50-50. I mean, the Tester race, by the way, there's this myth that Tester is losing. I mean, there have been two public polls in the Montana race. One is he's down by a couple and one that he's up by a couple. I mean, that race is seen in the family as being dead even. We're doing really well in the rest of the Senate races. There's wild optimism in the House about what's going to happen in the House, I can tell you. And I've been working very heavily in these House races and raising lots of money in the House races. And so we're now having today the election that we all hoped we were going to have 18 months ago. It's within our grasp. And what we now need to do is we just need to go work as hard as we possibly can, because it's not, Kamala Harris said something a few weeks ago that I just found amazing in terms of these moments that she's had. And she said the torch wasn't passed by Joe Biden to her, it was passed to all of us. And that's literally true. If we're going to preserve our democracy and our freedoms and our future, we have to leave it all on the playing field, guys. I mean, I think one of the things she did last night so effectively was remind us of the stakes of this election without scaring people. I mean, she found, I think, this kind of emotional place that we've been struggling to get to about the fear of Trump. And then finally, I just want to say something about this debate around Israel, is that you all know that there are people in the community that are unmovable, that view Trump and Netanyahu and the right wing as sort of, this is a matter of faith. It's not something you can argue and reason about. But that it is really important to not let their bullshit and their bluster and dominate your understanding of these things. And what Halie just did for you was lay out exactly how we should be talking about this. We cannot cede ground to them. We have to be on offense all the time. And we can't let them to continue to bully us around and push us around and intimidate us. Timothy Snyder, the great historian, in his book on tyranny, talks about how what happens in authoritarian cultures is that people start to obey in advance. They start doing things self-censoring. They start doing things the authoritarian wants before they even ask. And it is critical at every moment that we get up in our politics is to never obey in advance and to always be making our case powerfully, joyfully, loud and proud in every way we possibly can. We've got to get out of this place of worry and fear and go into a place of strength and confidence, the way the vice president was last night. She showed us the way. We just have to follow her now. And we have to make sure she's the next president of the United States. And I think it's within our grasp if we do the work. And Halie, I'm just really grateful for your continued amazing leadership of this organization. It's been a lot of fun hanging out with you guys over the last year and a half. And, I want a video. I want a clip of your video. I need to go study that so I get a little bit better at making the case. But thanks, everybody. And let's go fight.
Thank you.
Let's go fight and win.
And for those who aren't subscribed to Hopium, sign up. Simon provides updates on the polling and everything we need to be watching in this election. It's great. We'll send everyone the link. I also just published a op-ed in the Jerusalem Post summarizing the debate for Jewish voters, which I was drawing upon when I mentioned that, because I went through the transcript of the debate. So I put that in the chat as well. Thank you so much, Simon. We look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you. And
good luck, everybody.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Bobby Saferstein to close our event. Bobby is our Chief Program Officer who makes all our events happen. So thank you for that, Bobby, and over to you.
Thank you, Halie, and thank you to Simon, and thank you to the hundreds of you for tuning in today for our debate debrief. It's hard to believe, but 23 years ago, I was getting ready for my second day of classes as a freshman at NYU when my roommates grabbed me by the arm and raced me up to the roof of our dorm building. As we watched smoke billowing out of the first tower, a second plane crashed into the second tower right before our eyes. Of course, the horror and disbelief we experienced in that moment would be eclipsed not long after when the two towers themselves and towers surrounding them collapsed, and those of us on the street narrowly dodged the debris that would envelop Lower Manhattan. For me and my fellow classmates, the chaos, calamity, and scale of it all would forever shape our worldview. But you know what else would? The goodness of people who stepped up to help each other in whatever ways they could in the minutes, hours, days, weeks, and months that followed. No matter our background, our differences melted away, and the only thing that mattered was our shared humanity. It was the best of who we are, or put another way, it was the soul of our nation exemplified. Be it September 11th, January 6th, or October 7th, how we show up and respond to the events that shape our world matters. Leadership matters. And as we saw last night, there is only one choice in this race, and we cannot and will not go back. But to ensure we elect Vice President Harris and Governor Walz as our next president and vice president, we need your help. To learn about all the ways in which you can take action with JDCA, please visit jewishgems.org/do something. While there, we hope you'll sign up to attend events like this, join our phone and text banks each week, volunteer with one of our state and local chapters and affiliates, and travel and canvass with us in key districts. We also hope you'll consider supporting our critical election-related work by making a financial contribution by clicking on the link in the chat. Oh, and definitely check out our store to get the best Harris Walz merch. In just 54 days, the future of our country will be decided. How we get there is up to each of us. Thank you for doing so with JDCA. As we close out today's program, we continue to pray for the speedy return of all of the hostages still held by Hamas in Gaza and an end to the war that has taken far too many and way too much. Thank you again for joining JDCA. See you soon.